Samantha from Jessama Tutorials here, and today I'm going to show you how to sand and buff your clay so that it has a nice shiny finish. So these are the pendants that I'm going to be sanding, and I'm going to be using polishing papers. And now you can use wet dry sandpaper as well, that will work just as well. Just make sure you can go up to a really nice high grit with your polishing papers. With your wet dry sandpaper. So whether you're using a polishing paper or wet dry sandpaper, always start with the 400, then the 600, then the 800, 1000, 2000, and the polishing papers go all the way up to an 8000. The highest wet dry sandpaper that I've been able to get is about a 2000, so I'd still recommend getting these polishing papers because they go up to an 8000 and will give you a really beautiful finish before you even start with the buffing wheel. So with each of these I'm going to sand one of them. Let's see, I want to sand this one all the way up to my 800. I'm going to leave one of them at a 400 and I'm going to leave the others in between so that I can show you what a difference going to the higher grits will make. So let's start with this one, which is going to go all the way up to our highest grit. So we'll start with 400. And you'll just start sanding. And now when you're sanding, it's best to go in a circular motion. I've just found that it helps a lot. Rather than going up and down or sideways, it's better to just go round and round and round. And this I find is just the best way to sand. And this is just personal. And just continue sanding. You want to spend a good amount of time on your first grit, because with your first grit you're removing any imperfections, like possible fingerprints that you might have accidentally missed, maybe pieces of clay that might have got on there, maybe a little scratch that you didn't see, or just the general matte finish that you would get on polymer clay. And so let me just compare these two. So you can see that this one, after coming out of the oven, is kind of shiny in a way, but it's not because it's nice and smooth. It's because it's got mica powders lying all over the place from the metallic clay getting onto the translucent, and it's just unneat. This one, if I flash it around, you shouldn't see any shininess. And this will be the same with any pendant you're doing. So whenever you're sanding, if you can still see the same sort of shine that you get on a raw piece that comes out of the oven, you need to sand a bit more. Once you get to this nice beautiful matte finish, that is where you would stop. Then you would head onto the sides, and if possible sand in a round formation on your sides, but oftentimes my sides aren't thick enough for that, so it's okay to just go up and down like this. So sand your sides. Again with your 400, as much as you can, because this is going to make your piece nice and neat. And I'm not going to cut this video, so if you want to skip ahead, that's just fine. But I want to show you how long it actually takes me to finish off a pendant as far as the sanding goes. So you can see how long it actually takes me to sand each piece. And now sometimes you'll get a little cliff on the back here. So you can see there's a little bit of a cliff. I like to then bring over my craft knife and I'll just run it along the edge and it will pick up on that little cliff and get rid of it. Super easy, saves you a lot of sanding time too. Just be careful you don't chip the back, that's all. Okay, and that will have saved you a good 5 or more minutes for the sandpaper. Okay, and it's the same applies to the back as it does the front. If you can see shininess, like over here, hopefully you can see that side's a bit more shiny than around here where we sanded, you need to stay in that area still. So there we go, just make sure that you get the sides as well. Okay, and that's our first grit. Now I'll move on to the next one, which I think is a 600 in the polishing papers. And then you'll do the same thing, round and round and round. And basically, by going through the grits, you're replacing large scratches with smaller scratches, and then eventually, by the time you get to the 8000 grit, the scratches that you've etched into the clay are so minute that it comes across as really nice and polished. And that's why if you stop on a low grit, you will see that your polymer clay still has scratches and it's all matte. And that is especially apparent when you are using wet dry sandpaper, and that is why I don't like to use it. This sandpaper is a lot coarser than these polishing papers. If you have a lot of imperfections on your clay, like fingerprints that you need to get rid of, I'd recommend using the wet dry sandpaper, because this does not get rid of a lot of material. It's just there to take your pendant from a matte to a gloss shine. If you need to get rid of a lot of material, use the wet dry sandpaper, and then once you've gone to like the 2000 grit on your wet dry sandpaper, go back to the 400 on your polishing papers and bring it up to a high shine. Because I was never able to get my pieces to as high a shine with the wet dry sandpaper as I was with the polishing papers. Okay, and so let me just bring that across. You can see it's still not really shiny, but it's starting to look pretty nice. This is where, if I wanted to leave my pieces matte, this is where I would stop. Because it looks nice and well finished. It's really smooth on your fingers. You just want to sit and stroke that. But it's not shiny, but it's nice and neat. So if you wanted to leave your piece matte, that is round about where you would stop. Because the next one, which I think is 1000, I can't be quite sure, starts to get into like the satin finish. And now when you're doing this, you want to be applying pressure to your piece. If you're just kind of sanding and not really pressing down, you're not going to get as good a finish as if you're pressing down. You want to really press nice and hard on this piece. You can see that we're starting to get a bit of a satin finish there. And again, always remember to finish the sides. And at the moment, we're at probably about 6 minutes for this piece, and we're almost done. Whoops, I forgot to do the back there. It really is the first grit that takes a while. And then once I've done this one, I'm going to go and do the other ones, but I'm going to leave them at different stages, and then I'll show you what they look like. And then we can get onto buffing. And I'll show you how to buff by hand, and I'll show you how to use a rotary tool, which personally does a much better buff than if you do it by hand. But by hand, if you've sanded it properly, it does a pretty good job. Okay, I'll show you that. You can see it's starting to look a little bit more shiny, but it really is only until you get to like the last 2 grits that you actually start to see a shine on it. And then it's the buffing wheel that really makes it shine. You're only going to get like a satin finish by just sanding. To get a beautiful glossy finish, you really do need to get a rotary tool to buff. So I highly recommend it. The Dremel is the best one, in my opinion. And I don't use a rotary tool to sand. I always hand sand. The rotary tool is just a little bit too aggressive for my liking as far as the sanding goes. Here you can see that it's starting to get a little bit of a shine to it there. Now we're going to move on to the last one. And I'm pressing hard when I'm doing this, make sure that we get a nice finish. And I want to show you how it brings out the mica particles and increases the depth in the piece, because your mica chips will look absolutely stunning after you have sanded and buffed. And I sometimes like to switch to the back just to give it like a preliminary buff. Okay, and that's what you can get by just sanding. It's a nice satin finish, and for those of you that don't want a really glossy finish, that's a pretty acceptable finish. It's really nice, and so long as you don't want it to look really gloss, it looks really nice. And so now I just want to show you the difference between these 2 pieces, how it has brought out the shine in the mica particles. And it's not just because it's shiny, it's because you've sanded it. You can see that this part is a lot clearer compared to here, where this is a little bit more cloudy and the depth isn't quite as beautiful. And the mica shift over here is quite dull compared to this one. And your blacks will also start to become more black, and your white will become more white. So hopefully you can see the difference there. I'm going to bring over the buffing tool very quickly and I'm going to show you how to buff. It's super easy, and then I'll show you the difference between the two. Okay, now if you want to buff by hand and you don't have a buffing tool, just bring over a rag or a towel or a pair of jeans. Place this face side down and then rub it across the material as fast as you can. And that will buff it up. And you can see that that's like a really good buff without a rotary tool. And so you'll do that on the edges as best you can. The edges are a little bit tricky, but I don't worry too much about getting them to a gloss finish. Sometimes it's better to hold and buff it, just like that. You can see the sides are always going to be kind of that satin finish. And then here's what the back looks like right now. Let's give it a quick buff. And this is just an ordinary towel that I'm using. Okay, and there we can see it's much shinier. And the faster you rub it, the better your buff will be. Oops. So that's just something to keep in mind. The faster you go, the better the buff. And that's why the rotary tool is best, because it goes much faster than your hands can. But that is a very acceptable buff, in my opinion, as far as using a rotary tool. So a rotary tool is nice if you can afford it, but it's most certainly not necessary. But you need to have your project well sanded before you can get a good buff. Now I'll just bring over the Dremel. And this is the one that I'm using, and this is a handmade buffing tool. And I'm going to just set it onto my number 6 setting over here. Now you might want to turn down your sound because this makes quite a noise. Okay, so that definitely does have a really nice buff now, and it has, the rotary tool definitely increased the buff. You can see at the sides are quite a bit more shiny and the back is quite a bit more shiny. But it's not necessary to have a rotary tool to do your buffing. So long as you do your sanding correctly and you finish your bead off well before you put it in the oven, you'll be able to get a pretty good buff without a rotary tool. Now, just a side note, if you guys are looking for a buffing wheel, the one that I used, I do sell it on my Etsy shop, and I'll provide a link to it in the links below. Now, just want to show you the difference between these two. So without me twisting it so that it catches the light, you can still see that this one's microshift is really dull compared to this one, and the actual watercolor effect is definitely duller on this one. Now if I twist them around, let me just grab both of them, you can see that this one, although it's shiny, it's not a very nice shine. Well, this one's got a lovely, beautiful shine. Here, let me twist that around for you to see. And the backs are really nice. And this one, the back wouldn't necessarily need to be sanded because it is textured, but you can see what a difference the front will make. And then if any of you use resin, I highly recommend putting resin on this now, because that will just bring out the microparticles so much more, and the resin just is like the final piece of the puzzle to make something look absolutely stunning. So if you use resin, I definitely recommend using it. UV resin, ice resin, any of those will work. But if you're a little bit intimidated by resin, this buff will work just fine. It's a really professional buff. It will definitely get your pieces noticed at a market. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to go and sand these at different different grits. So one of them I will probably go and sand all the way up to my highest grit, but I won't buff it. Another one I'll probably sand up to my 1000th. Then other one I'm going to leave at a 400. And this one I'm just going to sand and buff so that I can show you how beautiful this is going to come out. So I'll do that quickly and I'll show you what they look like. Okay, so I've finished sanding all of them. So I've decided to leave this one plain so you can see what it looks like. So you can see it's kind of sparkly, but it's obviously not been sanded at all. Then this one's been sanded on my first grit, which is just a 400, and so you can see it's matte, but it is clean. This one's been taken up 3 grits so that it's left on the satin finish, and this was sanded on my pink sandpaper, which I do believe is a 1500. I might be incorrect, but it was sanded up until this sandpaper. And you can see that it's definitely better than this one, but it's still not very shiny. But you can see if you compare the two together that the mic shift's much better. Then this one has been sanded all the way up to my 8000 grit, and you can see it's got a light sheen to it, but it has not been buffed. And next to these 3, you can see that the mic shift has steadily gotten better. And then finally, this is the one that we finished up and we buffed, and you can see it's got beautiful shine to it. And finally, you can see that mic shift's absolutely stunning. So that is why I sand my pieces. And so I do hope that this tutorial was helpful to you. If it was, please do let me know. If you have any questions about this tutorial, please do let me know and I will answer them in the comments as best I can. And if you would like more tutorials like this one, please consider subscribing to the channel, as I post every single week and I'm sure you won't want to miss anything. And please do leave a like, as it is also very helpful to me. And as always, I will see you in the next tutorial. Bye for now.